Dr. Keith Nurse is our facilitator for today and for the course. He created the course materials. And so we'll be inviting you all to jump onto the platform as you will be completing some of the work on the platform. So please do log in and get into the group. Go onto the group. You will see a forum there, and we will be using the forum to help us collaborate. We'll also be using the course content. We've added materials for the tutorial in the course content itself. So it will be just after the second lesson. You'll see not the second lesson, the second module. All right, so before we begin officially with Dr. Nurse, any questions thus far or any challenges? You can raise your hand or you can let us know in the chat. Right, we see we have 20 persons online. If you can drop in the chat, just say hi and let us know where you're from and what your role is at your organization. So we just get a sense of who's in the room as we begin.
Hello, good evening. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to be discussing critical issues in relation to the creative economy, creative industries, creative entrepreneurship. So thanks very much for coming on board. Thanks very much to Marielle and her colleagues, Safia, Demani, for making all of this happen, and for the folks at the Caribbean Development Bank as well. So, yeah, welcome. So, maybe Marielle could remind me, we had originally designed this course on proposal writing and grant writing for CIIF, which is the Creative Industries Innovation Forum or Fund. And that was back in 2020, was it? Or 2019?
2019, I believe.
19, wow.
Yes.
Time has flown. So yeah, the world has changed a little bit since then. We had COVID, which really impacted the creative sector in a significant way and have changed, I would argue, the terrain in which we operate. So, for example, a lot of content and the delivery systems went increasingly digital. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's also that the business models have shifted because of the expansion of the digital platforms. So social media exploded, and the digital platforms became more dominant, and in fact, in some instances, have surpassed some of the traditional players. So the process of dematerialization of content, digitalization of content, the growth of creative services as opposed to creative goods, all of that has really happened in the last 5 years. So, there's an old Chinese saying, be careful what you wish for, particularly if you wish for interesting times. Well, we've had interesting times in the last 5 years. Nonetheless, even with all of these transformations, one can argue that there's some things that remain the same, which is that even with technological change or changes in business in the markets, there is still a requirement to write proposals or develop proposals and be able to make a case for why someone should invest in your initiative or your project or your startup or whatever, as opposed to someone else's. And in this regard, the skills that are needed are still the same as they ever were, in fact. You have to be able to define what is your value proposition, meaning what you're bringing to the table, You also have to indicate, who would be interested in this. So where's your market? Who's your target audience, etc. And also, how much is this going to cost? But more importantly, what is the expected return on investment? And so those critical rubrics, if you may call them that, for a proposal writing process still apply. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, before digital, after digital, some things remain the same. And this is a critical skill or core skill that is applicable to any industry or business or mode of operation, whether you're in for-profit, not-for-profit. The skill set is still important and critical. So, yeah, so those are my opening remarks. I'm really happy to have you on board. Mariel, what do you want me to do now? You want me to go through some of the slides that we have entitled The Winning Proposal?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, so if you could pull those up, I can talk quickly about it. And the aim here today, guys, is for us to have, I'll make a short presentation on these key issues, and then we'll have a chat, and then I'll talk briefly about the case studies which I've designed and how we're going to use that as a basis for developing on strengthening your skill sets. We have a worksheet which we want you to work in groups on for each of the case studies. So you get to utilize the case studies as a basis for building your skills as a group. And so the peer-to-peer learning process is really important. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in the second half. So preparing a winning proposal, I've framed it as key questions. And why questions? They're really questions that you should be asking yourself as the proposer. And we frame it along these lines because, in effect, if you can't answer these questions to yourself, then you can't answer it for anyone else. And so these are really important dimensions of the proposal writing process. Whether you're writing for a grant, like the CDB CIIF grant, or whether you're writing a proposal or a business plan, or feasibility study, or whatever you want to call it, it all requires the same process by and large. So the first thing is, what are the key questions? So I'll go through 5 key questions. And the first is, what am I proposing? And this is what we call the summary pitch. You must be able to say in very succinct terms, what is the thing that you are proposing? If you can't do it in a short elevator ride, it means you don't know what you're talking about. You haven't cinched your idea. You haven't been able to delineate the key elements of this process. So we use the 30-second rule as a benchmark, or what we call the elevator pitch. This is a really important skill. I don't know how many of you have ever participated in a trade fair, for example, or a particular conference or seminar or workshop setting where people's attention spans are really low. And so, or you at an event and you're meeting someone or you meet someone by the bar and they ask, oh, what are you about? You know, what's your company do? You have 30 seconds to basically share with them these core ideas. If they're interested, they will ask you for more details. And so it really is an important opener. And so you really want to be able to cinch that. And so that for me is the core thing. And this revolves around things like understanding what is your particular value proposition. So we'll talk more about that. Next slide. So the next one is, what am I aiming to accomplish? And you may have well heard of these things, what are called SMART objectives. And SMART objectives is an acronym where the S stands for specific, M measurable, A is for actionable, R is for relevant, and T time bound. I can't begin to tell you how important this is. So for example, I've read most of the cultural policy documents for the Caribbean region. Most of them don't have SMART objectives. They have a long list of what I call wishful thinking about what needs to happen, but they're not specific, so they don't identify where we are now and where we want to go next. So there is, as a result, there is nothing that is measurable. So they can't indicate what is the existing scenario today. So for example, in a particular sector, if you wanted to say we wanted to increase employment for creative persons, they don't know what the employment levels are today. And so they don't, which is a benchmark, and they don't know clearly what is the future specific measurable outcome that we want to boost employment by 25%, for example. So what would that look like? And then you need to have what we call actionable objectives, meaning things that you can actually do, meaning that you have either the capacity to do it yourself, or maybe you have the capacity to do it in conjunction with a collaborator, a stakeholder, whatever. But it must be something that can be done. And then the fourth area is relevant. Is it relevant in the context? Or are you creating an objective that is relevant in another country or another region as opposed to in the Caribbean or in a particular island territory or mainland territory in the Caribbean? So again, really important. And then last but not least, time bound. You have to specify the date by which this is to be done or the time frame within which it is to be done as a deliverable. So when you combine all of this together, it provides a fairly solid framework for implementation. And I emphasize the implementation component. Why? Because one of the things that's very characteristic of many developing countries, and particularly in the Caribbean, is what I call implementation deficit disorder, which is that often we just don't have the capacity to complete the task, to put the thing in place, and so on. It's not for lack of trying, it's not for lack of talent. In some instances, it's not even for lack of resources. Is that often there's too much fragmentation in the ecosystem, or there isn't a curated pipeline of actors or stakeholders working in concert. So what we have is a lot of stakeholders working at cross purposes, people competing with each other rather than collaborating. And so even with the best of efforts in terms of our SMART objectives, we aren't able to deliver or implement because not enough people or not a significant cadre of stakeholders are working in concert. But that's another story altogether. Next slide, please. The third key area that's important in moving forward is to, one, identify who's this project important to, meaning that you need to understand both the target market, but also the key stakeholders, which comes back to my earlier point about the implementation deficit disorder. When I talk to creatives, one of the things that is always striking is they're not clear who the target market is. So let me give you an example. As you may well know, I'm the chairman of Caribbean Tales, a film distribution company. And when we host our incubator for filmmakers, I ask them this question. So who are your, who's your target market? And they immediately think that that is the audience. So they would say things like, well, our target market is millennials or young people between the age of X and Y, or maybe it's young adults, or maybe it's an elderly population. And I'm like, okay, that's the final audience. But how do you get to that final audience? Well, you have to go through distributors, investors, television or film distribution companies. And there's a whole range of stakeholders who you have to convince before you get to the final audience. Because without these stakeholders being involved, there's no way for you to get to the final audience. And so those group of stakeholders have to be viewed as part of your target market. So your marketing has to be focused on that group as your first call of port. Because without them, you can't get to the final audience. So this is a really important thing that most people don't think about when we, when we say, well, so who and where is your target market? We also ask the question, what is your target product as well? Which is an important thing. And often, most people in the creative sector start from the position of what I call a supply-oriented framework. Well, I'm a writer, and this is my area, this is my genre. That's what I am selling to a particular target audience. So this is my target product. And sometimes what we do when we do workshops, or we ask them, well, let's start from a demand-oriented framework. Who or where is a target market that you think you can get some traction with for you, and consequently, what is that target product look like, or target service? And so this demand-oriented framework changes the dynamic in an important way, which is you're now thinking, well, who am I serving? And then you work your way back. That is not to say that you are compromising your art or whatever. It just means you're developing a certain level of sophistication about it. In that you then understand what are the attributes of your target market. So for example, again, let's say it's film. When would this target group or target market be interested in consuming your content? That's really important. If it's animation targeted at children, then maybe it's Saturday morning, or on the weekends. Or increasingly it's on a smart device. And so how it's composed, how it's framed, how it's marketed, all of those things would then revolve around the who and where is the target market. Okay, next slide, please. And this is where things start, what do you call it, where the rubber starts to hit the ground. How much would the particular project or initiative cost? You have to identify the resources, come up with a budget, and the budget must have at least two elements: the expenditure side, as well as the income side. And so what you're trying to measure and document is, is this thing going to generate a return on investment? And how much is that? So, I'm the president of a college of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts here in Trinidad and Tobago. And so often when I'm having discussions with my colleagues about a particular initiative or whatever, the issue of money comes up. And sometimes people would say, oh, no, this is costing too much money. And I would say, well, that's not the real issue. The real issue is this going to generate a return on investment? And what is that quantum of return? That's the critical issue. It's not how much the thing costs. It's whether or not you can generate a return. And this is a really important shift in mindset as well. Because if you can convince an investor or a distributor or some other entity that the returns are going to be significant, then the resources flow, even if it is grant funding. And the return may not only be financial. In fact, in many instances, it can have, particularly in the creative sector, it can have benefits that reverberate throughout the society or throughout the economy. So let me give you an example. For example, festivals tend to have impact beyond the firm or the entity that is offering a festival, right? So they have lots of multiplier effects. And so you can have a scenario where, in fact, some of the main beneficiaries or the top beneficiaries are not the ones that are putting on the event or the festival. And so you talk, for example, about the macroeconomic benefits of a festival. Vendors make money, people in the transportation sector, the accommodation sector, airlines, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of benefits that flow around. Right? You may not make any money at the gate, but the impact is broad spread throughout the economy. And it could also generate what we call social benefits and psychological benefits, boost the cultural confidence of the community, or it could elevate the profile of a particular target group, maybe a marginalized group. It can also generate new investment in a particular locale, you name it, all right? So you want to be able to articulate all of those potential benefits when you are talking about return on investment. It's not just an economic or financial construct. In the creative sector, you could talk about all of these both economic and financial benefits, as well as wider socio-political, cultural, psychic benefits. But often what I find is that you do have to indicate what resources you are putting in. and consequently, you want to indicate what is the resource gap. Right? So that's a really important element to include as well. And the last slide. Yeah, so I talked about return on investment earlier. This is the real important thing, which is that you always have to relativize things. So you need to do your homework and identify other initiatives or business case studies or other practices that are relatable to your particular initiative. So having benchmarks and targets are really important. So for example, if you are able to benchmark your event or your initiative relative to something else that has happened, both in your country or elsewhere, that often helps to advance your case. Because you could then say, well, in another small island developing state, they've done this, and it generates a return of 20% per annum. And you see, well, in our project, we're going to generate a 30% return. Then for those who are the potential investors or facilitators, they would be more comforted or confident that you know what you're talking about and that, that there is a benefit that is calculable and measurable and specific and so on, that would then make it easier for them to say yes to you, right? And this requires a level of precision, but it also requires a level of creativity in how you pitch your project. So that's why it's often argued that proposal writing is both an art and a science. So you're utilizing some scientific principles from economics or from accounting, but then you're also utilizing creativity to generate some emotive impact for your potential or target audience. So those are all really critical elements of the proposal writing process. So I hope these 5 key questions have been of some value. But we could open it for some questions or comments now. So Mariel, over to you, over to the audience.
Thank you, Dr. Nurse. That was very, very insightful. We are opening for questions at this time before we go into the workshop aspect of our session this evening. You all are a little bit shy. You can put your question in the chat if you prefer not to do it, not to speak out loud.
If I may, Kareem here, and Dr. Nurse, I think we have worked together in the past. I would have been at the OECS at some point, and you would have done some work with the Dominica government on the World Pearl Music Festival.
Okay.
So does Esprit et al.
Yeah.
What I found, Dr.
Happy
Nurse,
New Year
is
to you.
that Happy New Year to you too. What I have found, I think, and I decided to do the course because I felt it could bring some extra accreditation if me. That if somebody were to hire for proposal, then at least, the stamp of Dr. Nurse and CIIF would make sense.
Yeah, thanks very much.
One needs to be strategic. But what I've seen is that most times when you're putting together proposals and you obviously follow all the answers to the questions that you have posed, the issue becomes, and I'm going to throw something to you, the issue becomes one where say you are coming from a consultant perspective, and not someone who's asked to. So there is a pot of funds available, and you are saying, well, I think I can put a creative proposal together. So from a consultant's perspective, where a funding agency have said, well, we have 20,000 euros to offer for this project. And the thing is, you do not know. So you know there's 20,000 euros. It doesn't mean that they're going to spend 20,000 euros. They may very well go above 20,000, or they may fall short of 20,000. And then you get yourself in a bind of the lowest bidder requirement. Just from your experience, do you think there is a benchmark for considering what the best cost could be from a consultant perspective working within the creative space? I mean, it might be a bit of a two-tailed question, but I think it could lend to the conversation, just because I know a lot of persons may be responding to calls for grants, and sometimes they maybe fall short because perhaps another proposal, was on the buzzer with the cost.
Okay. No, that's a really important question. And it's what I'd call a predicament. So let me start from the other side. So whenever I have engaged with, let's call them commissioning agencies, right? So these are the agencies that are putting out, let's say, a call for proposal. I always say to them, I think you should give an indication of what either the max budget is or the ballpark, that it could give a range, because otherwise you could end up with a whole wide array of proposals, and it is, you're wasting a lot of people's time. Okay, because often, and these are for open bids. A commissioner could also have a selective bidding process where you invite certain entities. And again, there it is useful to indicate what the ballpark is. But in many instances, though, the traditional practice is to not provide those details, particularly for big projects, governmental related projects. So now we're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and you're looking to see who would be the lowest bidder. But you do put some provisos. You say, well, we'll select the lowest bidder based also on competence and capacity to deliver. All right, so that's the commissioning agency side of things. On terms of the person or the entities that may be interested in bidding for something, if it isn't indicated, you need to do a little bit of reconnaissance. And this is where we move from being a science to being an art, which is that try and get some feelers on the ground, chat with a few people and say, like, what kind of money are we talking about? And I've done that many times. So someone has asked me to put a proposal together, or the institution I'm involved in. First question I ask is, what kind of money are we talking about? And that really helps to narrow things down very quickly and give you focus. If you are unable to get that information, so if they don't publish it, and if you can't get anyone who has some level of authority or knowledge to share that information with you, then your next best option is to do some kind of benchmarking, right? Which is, how much is a project like this realistically cost to implement? Or how has it been implemented elsewhere, and at what cost? And then you work from there. So there is no simple solution to this, unfortunately. But I can say to you that when I do talk to commissioning agencies, I say to them, especially if it's in, like, for example, in the creative sector, and often maybe it's not really big commercial projects, that the focus be on letting the participants know, or the potential applicants know, what kind of money we're talking about. Right? It saves a lot of people time. And so, yeah. But that's a great question, and Kareem, really important. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. Thanks a lot.
Anyone else has a question that they'd like to pose to Dr. Nurse? This is your opportunity to learn how to shape your own proposal. So where have you found yourself stuck in the past?
That's a question?
No.
Or you're asking the participants. Okay.
Right, to think about where they have found themselves stuck in the past in their proposal writing.
Good evening, Dr. Nurse. This is Renata Chakasang from Guyana.
Oh, hi.
There's a UNESCO call out right now
Mhm.
for something in communications, and it mentions working with grassroots people, etc. I work with an organization that we actually don't, we're not implementers per se. So I'm seeking to partner with another institution to do this. And the question is, who gets to do what? How do we clarify our objectives? Because you said that it should be no more than 3 and 5, and we really need to be crystallized about what we want to accomplish, the end game per se. There's not a revenue generating component to this per se, but we're looking at messaging and how to get people involved. I guess it's supposed to be something around advocacy and how do we get persons on the ground to be more effective in terms of their messaging. So how do we go around really, one, working with another, partnering with another organization, and two, some of the more in-depth questions or granular questions we should ask ourselves in order to crystallize the objectives?
Yeah. Building, and I think in the course that we had developed back in 2019, there's a particular segment that deals with collaboration and so on. And I think we link to online course offered by somebody else on this very specific topic. So I mean, and if I recall from the slides that I put together, the first thing is that this potential collaborator, you must have at least the same goals and ambitions in relation to the project, right? Meaning that you mustn't be working at cross purposes.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's like first base 101.
Correct.
Second thing is that there should be complementary capabilities. Right? So you shouldn't be stepping on each other's toes. And you want to ensure that there's a clear division of labor, a clear set of attribution of roles. So often I find that's the real important part. And then you define it almost contractually or through some kind of MOU.
Okay.
You
Makes
make
sense.
sure everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Then the third thing I find to be really important in this regard is that when you're engaging with the client or putting together the proposal, the distribution of the required resources because
Mm-hmm.
the devil is always in the details.
Definitely.
And so
Resource.
the budget is actually a reflection of the project. And so you
Right.
have to get the budgeting right. Who or which institution is taking the lead? Huh? Which
Right.
institution is bringing forward the most of the let's call it the intellectual resources, the expertise, the capabilities. What is the rate at which you're paying these resources? Is
Mm-hmm.
it a daily rate? Is it an hourly rate? If it's a long project, is it a weekly rate, a monthly rate? And often, when you do up your budget, you realize, wow, we've now priced ourselves out of the market. So you then have to go back and rework
Mm-hmm.
the proposal to fit the budget.
Right.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we don't have too much time, so we need to hit the ground running.
yeah.
And with what you talked about in terms of resources, and because that's already been asked. That's almost the first question to ask. What are we getting out of it?
Mhm.
How much of, if we were to get the grant, how much of the grant will be ours to work with, so to speak? And I mean, I don't necessarily need the grant money, but I thought that was kind of like, we haven't even gotten to the proposal writing point yet, and you're already asking how much of the grant money will be ours.
So,
So, I mean,
yeah,
it is important for us to know exactly where things are at the beginning.
yeah. So that's why this is a process, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you need to have this coming together of minds and ambitions,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? Because I've been in projects where people asking the money part first. And I'm like, and they even demanding, well, I need to get this much. And I'm like, but we haven't specified what you're going to do yet.
Right.
Suppose what you're going to do or what you can do requires less remuneration than you're calling for. Then this is a non-starter. So you really have to get past that point and get everybody to relax, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's focus on what's the goal, because often the goal is everybody wants to get paid. Fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to get a little piece of the pie. Fine, no problem. But you need to start with who are the beneficiaries of this process? Especially if it's a social project like the one you've indicated. You need to
Mm-hmm.
start there. Get everyone to focus on that first. And then you work your way back down to the budgeting. And then the budgeting will then force you to recalibrate the project. And then you go back to the front again. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe even go back to the budget again. Right? So it's an iterative process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right? And in fact, you are learning, right? The proposal writing process is a means by which you learn. You learn what this particular initiative is about. And that's why, for example, the big accounting firms, I won't call their names, you probably all have heard of them. They have worked out these processes and are off, and they've done so many of them in different parts of the world. They have, in effect, a cookie cutter framework that they could apply to multiple scenarios.
Oh.
Right? So that's their competitive advantage. If you are a small entity and you're doing this for the first time every time, then this process of preparing a proposal consumes a lot of your time. And often people underestimate how much time is involved. So the other thing that you have to do in your budgeting is that you should really price in the time that you are spending developing the proposal.
Okay.
Now, you have to do that smartly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And still remain competitive. Huh? But you should never not include the quantum of time that is being put in. So, for example, your entity may not be the one that is implementing the project or delivering most of the project, let's say, but you are doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of the proposal writing. Well,
Right.
then you need to put a budget in the allocation for
For
your
that.
role, right? It mustn't be viewed as pro bono unless you are doing it specifically pro bono.
Right. I think if you don't value it, then people
Nobody else is
tend to
going to
be,
value it.
dismissive of it. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, I'm coming to Guyana later
Oh,
this week.
good.
So
This month. All
this
right.
week?
We'll be here this week. Okay. We'll be here.
Okay.
Looking forward.
Okay, pleasure. Any more, Mariel? Those are two good questions. Very
Those
well
were two,
developed.
yeah, yes, great questions that I think would hopefully are beneficial to everyone online. All right, so we can perhaps pivot at this point, as we're just about an hour into our session, into the workshop area of our session. So I'm not sure how you wanted to do it, Dr. Nurse, if you wanted to do the groups by, or whether you want them to choose the group that they want to be in, or you want to do the groups by the, the who aligns with this subsector.
Yeah, I think it's maybe we need to find the most efficient means, but self-selection is always better because people want, their area. So maybe I can pull up that presentation with the case studies, and I'll just talk through quickly, and then we can assign the rooms. I see we have how many? Close to 30 participants or 20 plus participants?
20 plus participants. I know we have, it's gone up, yes. So
yeah, it's gone up a bit.
20,
All right. So we have 6 case studies. If it was evenly distributed, that's 5 persons per group. That's very manageable. So maybe that's how we could do it. We want to have as much of an even distribution as well. And sometimes I encourage people to do a case study outside of their area of interest or expertise, because what that does is facilitate a process of learning. So you learn something new, and it operates outside of your traditional context or comfort zone, and it gives you that capacity to apply a new way of thinking, and so on, which is the purpose of this process. This process is a learning process, all right? And the goal is to strengthen your skill sets. And so your best way to advance your skill sets is to, learn something that you don't know. Right? So we want to encourage people to do that. Anyway, so next slide, please. What I've done is this very simplistic diagram where I've identified there's 4 key dimensions to this proposal writing process. Where first of all is the case, and we have 6 cases, different types of, let's call them creative entrepreneurs. And what we do is we then identify what is the context and the opportunity. Now, I emphasize opportunity here because in the area of proposal writing, if there are no opportunities that can be identified, then what's the point? And this is a really important thing. If you are a proposal writer and you can't specify what in the context makes this initiative, this project, or whatever you want to call it, something that is going to generate a return on investment, you might as well not start. Okay, so opportunities are really important to identify. And then the third area is the ask. And I've had this happen to me many times, where you go to a meeting proposing something, and the person on the other side of the table asks, so what are you specifically asking for? What do you need of us? And this is where you have to be really crystal clear. And that's why I put it in quotation marks as well. The ask, what do you want from us, or for the person who you are having the negotiations with or the discussions with? And then you say, okay, this is the proposal. And this proposal must not just be about what's in it for you, the proposal. It must also have a sense of what's in it for the person on the other side of the negotiating table. So this 4-dimension element is really all critical. You must have all 4 elements of it working in concert for it to be really successful. So what I could do is I'll quickly describe each of the 6 cases, and then we go from there. So next slide. So the first case is called the visual artist. What's the case? The visual artist is a young emerging artist who has had 5 successful local and regional exhibitions and is keen to expand into international markets. We understand this very well. We all live in small economies. So exporting your services is a really important thing. What's the context? The Caribbean visual arts has been generating increased interest among the top galleries, museums, and collectors in global cities like Miami, New York, and London. However, with budget constraints in these core markets, the visual artist is seeking traction in non-traditional growth markets in the Middle East and Asia. As we all know, that's where the money is these days. So what's the ask? The visual artist has been able to secure a partial grant to participate in Art Dubai. I just put Art Dubai. It could be anywhere. And is pursuing financial support for travel and accommodation, right? And in this case, participating in a trade fair or participating in a biennale or something of that sort is a marketing initiative for visual artists, right? So this is not a trip. This is really a marketing initiative, or what we call, forget the terminology we use. But yeah, understand what I'm saying, I presume. And so the proposal, the visual artist seeks participation in Art Dubai as a launch pad for diversification into new markets. All right. And then you have to develop those things. So that's the visual artist. The next slide, or the next case study, is entitled The Animator Entrepreneur. What's the case here? The animator is based in a small Caribbean island and has trained and worked in one of the top industry locations in North America. The animator entrepreneur is the owner of a small studio that employs 4 staff and has done subcontractual work in cooperation with regional firms. What's the context? The animation sector has expanded into the digital education market, which has grown appreciably after the COVID pandemic. There's rising demand for culturally relevant content in the early childhood, primary, and secondary school arena. What's the ask? The animator entrepreneur is seeking new software and subscription-based cloud services, which are needed by the recently hired instructional designer. And the proposal, the animator entrepreneur anticipates a healthy return on investment given the growth in demand. And one of the reasons why I chose this particular case study was to take animation out of purely, entertainment. because there are lots of growth markets. So this is a really interesting case study in that we're not going after traditional market. And you could see that even with the previous one, it's like, where is the new growth market? So that's a theme running through all of the case studies. Next one, please. The soca musician. The soca musician has had several breakaway hits in recent carnival seasons and has built a strong following in the region and in the diaspora through live performance. So that's the main source of income. The context, the music industry has pivoted to a digital marketplace with significant income being generated in online platforms. And so what's the ask? The soca musician aims to generate an additional income stream through building a digital studio and label to represent a cadre of upcoming artists. And the proposal, the soca musician aims to procure new digital equipment to outfit the studio and marketing resources to establish the label. Again, this is an interesting case study because, in fact, the soca musician is moving away from being an artist to become a full-fledged entrepreneur, and potentially using his or her linkages and networks and so on to tap into new markets. So again, this is an interesting case study. A new market, but also adopting a new business model or mode of operating. So next one, please. The book publisher. The book publisher has a small catalog of Caribbean authors who are trending on social media platforms and has been approached by an international distributor to co-market. What's the context? The book publishing industry has diversified with the growth of audiobooks and other digital delivery modes. And so the book publisher is seeking financial support to expand the catalog with digital content. The book publisher has commissioned new content and needs funding to make advances to the authors. Again, this is an interesting case study. Again, in terms of diversifying your market, but also changing your business model a bit in this case. So again, it's all a process of almost reinventing your operations, and creating a value proposition that would be, for example, be attractive to, let's say, an institutional investor or a grant-making institution by showing that you already have some traction in traditional markets, and now you want to leverage those capabilities in new areas. Next one, please. This is called the film producer. The film producer has an impressive track record in feature films. The context is that the film market has an expanding demand for serial content or serialized content with the growth of digital platforms. We know all the digital platforms. You don't need me to name them for you. And what's the ask? The ask is that the film producer is seeking a co-production agreement with an established company in the UK and needs counterpart funding for a 5-part series. And what's the proposal? A distribution deal. They is seeking bridging finance. So it's bridging finance that they're looking for to make this whole co-production and distribution deal come into effect. So this is another interesting case study. And you can see that they're diversifying away from feature films. So feature films have a particular place in the market, and they generate a certain level of income traditionally. Serial content will generally cost more, it depends, but can have a longer shelf life and generate more income over the life of the of the project or the initiative. The next one is called the Festival Entrepreneur. The Festival Entrepreneur operates a niche event in a Caribbean mainland territory. The context, the festival economy is growing rapidly and has strong spillover effects in branding the destination. Some of what I was talking about earlier. The festival economy the festival entrepreneur is pursuing a streaming agreement and requires consultancy services to improve the broadcast quality of the event. What's the proposal? Funding to commission a digital provider, meaning someone who's going to manage all the streaming of the content, etc., etc., etc. And this is the case for a lot of events and festivals. No longer is it just a localized event that happens in one specific time phase only. You can now create a digital life for the event or festival, and it could be accessed remotely again and again and again and again by audiences in multiple locations. So that's the 6th case study. And I hope they're interesting for you guys. I can say that I was thinking about this for quite a few weeks. So I'm happy that I'll be happy if you are happy. Let me put it that way. So what we're going to do with this? So take me to the last slide. All right. So this can be defined as a log chart, a rubric, a framework for developing a proposal, right? In any proposal, you want to ensure that you have, at a minimum, 3 key strategic objectives. I would say a maximum of about 5. And that helps you to really crystallize things. So, for example, for most of the case studies, the key strategic objective is to diversify sources of income or expand into new markets or generate a new business model. So a lot of the case studies revolve around those very specific strategic objectives. The other related objectives would be around either building some competencies in-house or generating some stakeholder relationship. Again, really important. So you either hiring some skills inside to the organization or boosting your own capacities, or you bringing in some skills. Yeah, so it depends, right? And then like a third key strategic area is this area of generating new modes of operating, so that you are reframing your value proposition ultimately, but you're also generating new sources of income, making yourself a more sustainable business unit or sustainable business enterprise, etc., etc. So you can have a whole range of strategic objectives. You want to be able to cinch it specifically. Then the next area is called target market stroke stakeholders. Again, fairly clear here. You could categorize the two. So for example, you may want to say, this is your target market, and these are your stakeholders. So you could separate into 2 entities. I would recommend that because sometimes your target market is not a stakeholder. in the classic sense. So, and remember what I said earlier is that your target market should include things like distributors. Let's call them the middlemen or middle institutions that play a critical role in taking you to the marketplace, right? Could include investors, it could include, copyright organizations, you name it. And then you must have some benchmarks on targets. Is this type of initiative, has it been done by other entities? What kind of money are we talking about? How many people are involved? Is there a basis by which we can compare ourselves and then ultimately our target? So maybe our target is to create a 25% growth in income for the company or the organization. Or maybe our target is to, increase the number of critical employees, to move from 4 people to 6. And using that as a basis for which your growth would be defined going forward. And this is where you then start talking about, well, what are the resources? You could talk about human resources, you could put that in one category. Financial resources would be another category. And this is where particularly the budget comes in. So what kind of money are we talking about? Is it $100,000? Is it $500,000? Or maybe it's less, $10,000. And that, now if you are able to, for any particular strategic objective, work your way across, it helps to create a framework by which you are able to delineate what this proposal is all about, right? So you may not share this with whoever you're proposing to. This is really mostly for internal. It's for really internal learning about what are we really here about. So for example, if you came up with 5 strategic objectives and you work your way across and you say, whoa, boy, we can't do all of this. And you say, well, what's the 2 things that we could effectively do? And one of those things could be a short-term win, meaning that maybe you don't even need any external resources. We just need to reorganize your existing resources. And you could implement that within the next 3 months. And then you might have a second strategic objective that's maybe a little bit more long-winded. That may take 6 months to a year to implement. And that's what you need some additional resources for. And you really want to think in those terms, because often what I find happens with some of the creatives and people in other sectors as well is that they want the big fish before they even start. And I'm like, well, maybe you need to learn to creep first before you could start running. And so focus on generating some quick wins. What can you do today that can be implemented in 3 months? And more importantly, can show proof of concept. And can also show that you have some skin in the game, meaning that you have put some of your own resources into this and you are backing it. That really makes a big difference when you go to an investor or a grantor, and you could say to them, we have started, or, we've already brought on board these key stakeholders. We're just aiming to get to the next phase 2. That's a different value proposition than saying we're starting from scratch. We don't have anything on the ground. That's a less competitive position to be going into with a proposal. So taking those into account, that are some of the key elements of a winning proposal. So, yeah. If there are no more questions or maybe people have questions, I could do some clarification. How do you want to propose we go ahead now, Marielle? Can we put people into groups? Have they already selected a group or case study that they want to do?
So I think we will go in order. And if you're on the platform, it's also on the platform in the different sections. So we have the visual artist, and we'll open the first group.
But the goal is to learn from each other. So that kind of peer-to-peer learning process gets accelerated by the discussions around the case study. The second major objective is for you guys to learn how to quickly identify what are the main objectives or strategic objectives. Now, the case study provides a broad stroke with some details. This is not a mechanical process. It's not a test. You have some leeway to interpret things, but we are really trying to benefit from your own expertise. Remember, I mean, this is what differentiates this setting from, let's say, a more academic setting where people are more junior or maybe students who just come out of secondary school or are young adults. You guys are professionals. So you already bringing to bear a range of expertise and knowledge that is honed over years, if not decades in some instances. So the goal there is for you to work as a group, quickly capture what these strategic objectives are, 3 to 5, so 3 at a minimum, 5 at a maximum, and then you start working across the rubric or the worksheet where you're identifying target markets, key stakeholders, benchmarks that you can reference, and then the resources and so on. The third key thing we really want you to do after you've come up with your 3 to 5 strategic objectives is to identify one thing that you can move on as a low-hanging fruit. And why are we suggesting this? Well, we're suggesting this because if you are able to identify something that you can move on quickly, that is based on your existing resource capabilities, it shows to any potential investor, collaborator, distributor, even grant funding agency, that you know what you are about, that you can actually deliver on this particular initiative, project, whatever you want to call it. It also shows that you have some skin in the game and that you are well on your way. And that changes the dynamic when you come to, let's call it the negotiating process, if you are able to win an audience with a potential investor, collaborator, distributor, or grant commissioning agency. Because in effect, the question that's being asked is not if, but possibly how. So they won't be saying, well, we're not sure about this project, And now they'll be asking, well, what specifically would you ask of us? And how could we potentially collaborate? Or, what can we bring to this process that you don't currently have? So you really want to get to that point, because that's a different kind of discussion altogether compared to the if question, right? So those are the key things that we want to get or generate out of this process. next time we meet, I can't remember the exact date. Mariel will remind us. The goal is for you guys to present your group project, right? These 6 things. And, we'll give you 5 to 8 minutes to, in effect, pitch your project. And if you're able to tell us how you're going to start implementing, what is your quick win, that really helps to deepen the presentation and probably win over some hearts and minds. So we'll send you further details on what we expect, but generally, we want you to follow the worksheet and the rubric, not slavishly, but as a clear guide as to what are the core things that should be embedded in this proposal presentation. And we can take it from there. All right, so we'll send you further details, and I'm very confident, based on all the discussions that I've had in the breakout rooms, that you guys are going to be able to knock this out of the park. Again, you guys are seasoned professionals. Our job, my job in particular, is to be your guide, to help, shift things a little bit around, make the edges smoother, make it more marketable, etc., etc. So, Mariel, anything at this stage? You want to remind people of when we are due to meet again?
Yes, we have placed it in the chat. It's tutorial 2 will be on February 18th from 5 p.m. That is 5 p.m. AST. So most of the Caribbean time, right? Not Eastern time. Yeah. 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. There are also cohort members who are missing. So we are going to reach out to them and let them know about what the exercises are, so they can potentially join one of the groups that don't have many people as well. And we also see that a couple of persons in the chat said that they're willing to shift groups.